How would you describe your childhood bedroom? Bradley Drive was the fifth house from which I have childhood memories, and since it was the abode of longest dwelling, most memories originate there. I always describe that house as a post-World War II home that originally had three bedrooms, single bath, living room, dining room, kitchen, and open covered porch. The porch was later closed in to create a fourth bedroom. The 950 square foot house seemed quite adequate at the time, even with four rambunctious boys and both busy parents. The lot was about 50 feet wide and maybe 100 feet deep. There seemed to be plenty of grass to cut every week or so. Our backyard connected to several other backyards, so it seemed that we had a great deal of space between houses. We moved to 319 in 1954. The entrance was front and center, opening right into the living room. The three bedrooms were all on the back of the house, down a hallway, with each bedroom measuring about 10 by 10 feet. Mom and Dad occupied the middle bedroom. George and I doubled in the first room. Ken and Willie bunked in the back room. The house had oak hardwood floors throughout. Our room was just large enough for a set of bunk beds and two small dressers. There was one closet, which was about 4 feet wide and maybe 24 inches deep. Somehow it held clothing for two boys, and there always seemed to be boxes, bags, and miscellaneous stacks of Mom's stuff stuffed on the shelf and in the corners of the closet. Recollection of my extensive wardrobe includes 2 or 3 pairs of jeans, which often became the shorts of summer, 3 or 4 cotton shirts, 2 pairs of shoes, tennis and leather, and a middleweight jacket. There must have been a set of nicer clothes that were held back as Sunday bests. There were 2 windows in the room, one open to the driveway side of the house and the other to the backyard. There was usually a small hole in one screen that had to be stuffed with a piece of tissue to keep the mosquitoes out. We didn't get our window air conditioner until I was in upper elementary school. Whole house ventilation was handled by a single reversible window fan, which was in one of the dining room windows. Bedroom windows were open to provide a breeze throughout the night in warm and hot months. For some reason, the two heavily enamel painted doors and window trim stand out, as well as the crown and baseboard moldings. The bunk beds were very basic. The rails were about 1.5 inch angle iron with holes every 4 inches in the bottom. From the holes were hooked 3-inch coil springs that hook into a woven mesh of metal wire, something like 2 by 4-inch fence wire. On that foundation was a cotton mattress, tufted with buttons on top and bottom, much like the bunk Otis used in the Andy Griffith Show. George always had the top bunk, which, like Superman, he could mount with a single bound. The only mischief I can remember about that setup was the night George was leaning off the side of the bed looking down, and from below I kicked both feet into his mattress. He went flying off the bed about halfway across the room. I can't quite remember who administered retribution. The room was fairly cold in the winter, and I remember to this day putting feet down into cold sheets. I had a few games and toys in the dresser among the BVDs and socks. I did wear socks on occasion. We just didn't have many toys. Our musical instruments occupied the remaining space. There was a small reading light attached to my headboard, and I had a transistor radio that I listened to occasionally after hours. We spent most waking hours out of doors, at school, band practice, or just playing all over a 4 or 5 block area. With our bicycles, the greater Capitol Heights, East Montgomery, and city at large were within range. We were not noted for neat housekeeping. As a matter of fact, we probably were consistently the messiest house on the block. Mom and Dad both worked full-time jobs, and the brothers ran from can to can't all day, every day. Putting things away was a rare priority. Ken was the tidiest of the clan, and his room was usually the most orderly. George and I usually had ankle-deep debris on the floor with an occasional path in part of the room. When we would clean the room, we usually just shoved all that would fit under the lower bunk. In the latter days, we enclosed the porch to serve as a fourth small bedroom. That room served as the launching room, as the last stop before going off to college. My childhood bedroom was transformed into an indoor laundry room. For many years, we would haul the laundry down the driveway to the back of the house, where there was a small utility room that Dad and the neighbors had built. Funny memory about that room. It had a 7-inch thick concrete slab. You could probably launch a Saturn V rocket from that slab. By today's standards, our house was pretty small. My vegetable garden has considerably larger footprint than our boyhood home. That messy childhood bedroom and house generated a lifetime of memories. I don't think a large mansion would have been any better.